he knew exactly who the fuck I was, but he was basically like, he always made it seem as though he was asking certain things that after discovering in the process of that conversation, he would ask additional questions. So he kept saying, what do you do as a job? Do you talk about the news? And I was like, yeah, I talk about the news. And he kept saying, okay, so when you talk about the news, do you talk about the war? And I was like, what do you mean by that? He's like, do you talk about Trump? And that was the first time where I was like, what the fuck is this question? Like, I literally straight up told him, I was like, why are you asking me this? Like, I was like, what does this have to do with anything? Yeah, they asked me about my fucking Twitch bans, chat. It's not even a joke. They asked me about fucking Twitch chat, like Twitch bans. The reason for why they're doing that is, I think, to try to create an environment of fear, to try to get people like myself, or at least like others that would be in my shoes that don't have that same level of security, to shut the fuck up. And for me, I'm going to use the privilege that I have in that moment to try and see what the fuck they're doing.
You just heard from Hasan Piker. He is a leftist Twitch streamer, and odds are you've heard of him because he is the biggest political content creator in the country, at least for progressives. But he was detained over the weekend by CBP and questioned about his political opinions. That, my friends, is the dystopian nightmare that conservatives said that they were afraid they'd be subjected to, that the left is now being subjected to under the Trump administration. And I think he's correct to say that they were doing this because they want to send a message. They know that Hasan will talk about this, and that's sending a message to the rest of us and other individuals with larger online followings, or anyone that just vocalizes their opinion on social media, that, hey, we're listening to every single thing that you say, and we're looking at every single thing that you do. And with the way that Hasan described this, it leads me to believe that they were trying to find something incriminating or get him to self-incriminate. And just in case you don't know, Hasan is an American citizen. So we have an American citizen getting detained and questioned upon his re-entering the country because he espouses anti-Trump views. So this is a little bit troubling, right? And as attorney LOL Overruled pointed out, DHS flagging and detaining one of the U.S.'s largest left-wing voices for their political opinions, while the Trump administration suggests they might suspend habeas corpus, does not portend well for the future, I'll say. And this is obviously authoritarian. And I feel like I'm becoming a broken record because every single week I feel inclined to point out, hey, this thing that Trump is doing, this is what dictators do, this thing is what authoritarian regimes do, this is overtly fascist. But I mean, for those who don't understand how serious this is, Bassem Youssef, he's basically the Egyptian version of Jon Stewart, and he had a comedy show in Egypt. And he was questioned by the regime because he was criticizing them. He is now an American citizen, and he's talked about his experience living in an authoritarian regime and how he's thankful that in America he's free to say what he wants. So somebody who, in part, left their country because they couldn't do journalism has arrived at a country where the same thing is happening here, where something that only once happened in authoritarian regimes is now happening here in the United States. Because we have the First Amendment, and one thing that's great about that is no matter who's in power, typically we have the freedom to criticize that administration, vociferously so. But now they're very clearly sending a message to people like Hasan and people like myself and anyone else that, hey, we're listening, we're watching. Now, Hasan is taking this in stride. I don't think he's super rattled by it. He tweeted out yesterday, I got stopped by CBP at Global Entry for additional questioning. I'm out. It wasn't that bad. Very strange experience overall, though. And the next day, he streamed and talked about this. That's the video that you saw. You know, he describes the questions that he was asked. Do you think Hamas is a terrorist organization? And he just kept answering. The State Department views Hamas as a terrorist organization, just questions that are completely irrelevant for a U.S. citizen. It doesn't matter what he thinks about these political issues. He's a United States citizen. Move on. Let him in. But they didn't want to. Now, he talks specifically about smears that have been levied against him by slop tubers like Ethan Klein, smears that equate Hasan with terrorists. And he explains how the questions that they were asking were things that were brought up in the content nuke that Ethan Klein and individuals like him have been saying about Hasan Piker. So let's just listen to what he has to say, and then we'll reflect on this when we come back.
One thing that I will take note of that I thought was very interesting was the fact that a lot of the shit that like the Ethan Kleins of the world have like cried about over and over again were unironically brought up in that fucking conversation. I was shocked. Okay, not like the bleach sword, obviously, but like the Houthi. Like, did you interview a Houthi? It says here that you interviewed a Houthi. And I was like, or was he actually a Houthi? And I was like, he's not. You can look to all of the reporting that came out afterwards and before I interviewed him that he is not a Houthi, that he is a regular Yemeni citizen. And I said, like, his name is Rashid al-Haddad. He is not even a Shia. And the dude, luckily, again, Iraqi, went, oh, yeah, that's right. That's a Sunni last name. Al-Haddad is a Sunni last name. So he must not have been a Houthi. And the very fact that that was like a point of contention that could have fucking gotten me arrested is insane. And I genuinely, in that moment, was thinking like, these fucking dumbass slop tubers are actually playing with fucking fire.
Yeah, and I watched Ethan Klein's content nuke. It was extremely disingenuous. He took clips out of context and overtly equated Hasan and his views with terrorism, said he was a terrorist sympathizer. He photoshopped a Hamas bandana over Hasan. Just defamatory. And in this day and age, I think that this type of content is tantamount to an incitement of harassment at a minimum, but an incitement to get somebody in political trouble, to potentially make them a political prisoner. I mean, imagine if Hasan was not a citizen. We've seen Mahmoud Khalil, Rumeysa Ozturk, Mohsen Madawi arrested. Thankfully, Rumeysa and Mohsen were released. But like if Hasan had said all of this, but he were not a citizen, that type of content, those type of accusations that Ethan Klein levied could plausibly get Hasan detained. But since he's a citizen, they didn't detain him. But I mean, who knows how long citizenship is going to protect people like Hasan or anyone else for that matter, since they are now literally contemplating whether or not they'll suspend habeas corpus, depending on what the judges have to say in the United States. And since I'm bringing this up, we should probably listen to what Stephen Miller had to say about this, because he's not, insinuating that they might suspend habeas corpus. He's not hinting at it. He is explicitly saying we might suspend habeas corpus. That is just them suspending the Constitution. But let's listen.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not.
Troubling shit. So to go back to what Hasan was saying about Ethan Klein, in this climate, under this administration, we now know that these types of defamatory accusations of you being a Hamas supporter or a sympathizer because you're against genocide, that right there is incitement. It's defamatory. It is downright dangerous, because you saying that about somebody, especially if they are not a citizen, even if they're a green card holder, you saying that about this individual or somebody like that could get them in trouble. They could become political prisoners, as is the case with Mahmoud Khalil. So we are dealing with very dangerous shit. And Hasan goes on to explain that they kept asking him really weird questions about whether or not he had interviewed Hamas, which is something that doesn't matter because there are journalists in contact with Hamas for journalistic reasons. So in the event Hasan brought somebody from Hamas on the stream, you might disagree with that, but that's not illegal, because talking to different types of groups, regardless if they're deemed terrorist organizations or not by the State Department, that is journalism. And even though Hasan is a political commentator, he sometimes does engage in journalism. So the fact that they were asking him this in and of itself was very, very alarming, because it suggests that outlets like Drop Site News, for example, that has contacts within Hamas, that's illegal. So if you have a source within Hamas, that's illegal now? That's not journalism? I'll let Hasan explain, but I mean, this is really, really extreme shit that we're dealing with from the Trump administration.
But one thing that I thought was really interesting was in the actionable side of things, they also asked, have you ever interviewed a member of Hamas? Have you ever had a communication or correspondence with a member of Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthis? Now, what's really fucking insane about that is that as someone who works in media, sometimes I do actually do journalism, right? As I've maintained this position over and over again. And I said that I would, if given the opportunity, talk to someone that is a part of the Ansar Allah movement, a Houthi, or even Hamas, or even Hezbollah, right? I think that I actionable, right? Like those are the ones that if you say, how do you even classify a member of Hamas? It's not like even Hamas issues passports. Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? But that is the part where they were like, if you answer yes to any of that, that's when, there's like actually illegal stuff in there. Having said that, there is one part of it that wasn't illegal, which is being in communications or being in contact with someone in Hamas. Like that is a part of journalism you actually can do. It's fucking ridiculous. Like you can interview ISIS. Like what are we talking about? The notion that this would be an issue for the Customs and Border Patrol is fucking ridiculous. Okay.
Now, to go back to Hasan's point about slop tubers who are lobbing these defamatory claims against content creators like him, Asmongold, now the largest political streamer, period, but he's a right-winger, recently accused Hasan of materially supporting, I believe, Hamas. It was terrorist groups in general, but I think he singled out Hamas. Don't quote me on that. But I think that them trying to figure out if Hasan was in contact with Hamas would have hopefully gotten him to self-incriminate so they can say, oh, he's materially supporting terrorism. But I mean, as a citizen, how the fuck do you materially support a terrorist? That doesn't even make sense. And I'm making a little bit of a logical leap, so understand that this is conjecture here. But like, how exactly are you materially supporting a terrorist organization as a citizen? Material support to a terrorist group means you supply them with arms and logistical support. How can Hasan do that? So the only plausible reason for a citizen to be in contact would be for journalistic reasons. Not that he's in contact with them, but if he were, and he was literally just doing journalism, that is protected by the First Amendment. And even if Hasan explicitly said he supports Hamas, you might disagree with that, but guess what? That's protected by the First Amendment, at least in theory, but Hasan has not said anything like that. So all of these questions that they're asking him are irrelevant. This is a United States citizen re-entering the country. You don't need to gauge how sympathetic he is to terrorists. That's completely irrelevant. If you are genuinely concerned about Hasan, then get a warrant. But they're not concerned. They just know that he speaks out in opposition to the actions of this administration, and they don't like critics, and he's here, so why not detain him? It could have been completely coincidental. It's not out of the question to have somebody coming back into the country get questioned, especially depending on the country you come back from. I think he was coming back from France, so not the most suspicious trip, right? But it could be completely coincidental. But was that a coincidence? I think probably not. And the reason why I don't think this is a coincidence is because, as Taylor Lorenz put it, Piker's detention occurs against a backdrop of increasing scrutiny of political activists and commentators, especially those who challenge the administration's policies on Israel. This type of targeting creates an undeniable chilling effect. Already, activists who are critical of our government are nervous to leave the country, given the crackdowns happening on speech and the increased scrutiny at the border. Detaining U.S. citizens over speech, especially a political commentator and journalist, allows border control to become a tool of political intimidation. And that right there is the key. This is a tool of intimidation. They're not yet arresting citizens for political speech. At this point in time, citizenship is still protecting us. But that day is going to end probably in the near future. I think we all see it, because the fact that they can do this to somebody like Mahmoud Khalil, a permanent resident, he's still detained, by the way, means that this can happen to everybody else. So I don't think that it was a coincidence that Hasan Piker was detained. I think that this is something that they are doing to foster fear, to intimidate people, to get people to shut up and be quiet. Now, in all honesty, this could have gone a lot worse for Hasan, and I'm glad things weren't as bad as they could have been. As far as we know, they did not confiscate his phone or his laptop. They could have searched it. And I know that you're probably thinking, oh, that sounds a little bit unconstitutional. And typically it is, right? If you're on the street and ICE chooses to accost you and they want to look at your phone, well, that's a violation of the Constitution. But there is a loophole. If you're at an airport, that's technically a border zone. And the Supreme Court recently ruled that they can look through your laptop, your phone, so your electronics are fair game. If you enter the country or you're leaving the country, they can look and see if, I guess, you're an enemy of the state or you're critical of Donald Trump. So this is quite the escalation. It's scary for sure. The situation is absolutely terrible, but you shouldn't be compelled to shut the fuck up like they want you to, because they've already won if that's the case. So continue to use your First Amendment right that you are entitled to criticize this administration as you see fit. Of course, be careful and be smart about what you post. Don't incite violence or hate, but just simply be honest. You can criticize this administration. That is your First Amendment right to do so. So if you self-censor and you shut up like they want you to, you're letting them win.